Alright, we're going to talk about Daggerfall, and the footage we're using is from the Unity version. Maybe it's not fair, but the original is glitchy even for Bethesda, and I would rather display the game in its best polish. Yes, it's a bit modded, but I have left the core mechanics intact. Anyway, without further ado. The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall was released in 1996, after Ocarina got just enough of a fanbase to justify a sequel. Ocarina had a lot on the cutting room floor, having started as a gladiatorial combat game before eventually becoming an RPG. This time, they went full tilt into the RPG model from the start and fleshed it out considerably. And it's here where we first get a list of skills to base a class on, the ability to make our own custom class, and dozens of other staples the series is known for. Guilds are here, not just for fighters, thieves, Dark Brotherhood, and mages, but also temples and knightly orders with their own requirements. All of which have randomized quests rather than quest lines, resembling the Radiant system of Skyrim later on. And of course, there are the Daedric Princes, all offering artifacts for dubiously justified tasks. During my first attempt, I screwed myself out of buying potions and magic was tearing me a new one, especially with their paralysis spells. Long story short, it was not working. So starting over, I took a deeper dive into the strengths-weaknesses system in the character creation. See, later games would have birth signs for the player to choose from, which addresses this a little bit, but it was minimal in comparison. For Eliwood here, as an example, on the surface he focused on speed, strength, agility, long swords, and the bow, and had several other complementing skills. But under the hood, he could not use magic at all, or shields, or hand-to-hand. To make up for that, he had more hit points, had a combat advantage against all enemy types, and was immune to paralysis. Also, I did the smart thing this time and joined a temple that sells potions. If you have not played Daggerfall, it is hard to go into it blind. In fact, I would not recommend this game unless you are already a fan of the series or otherwise looking for this kind of brutal game. The enemies are merciless on their own, but you will need levitation, slow fall, or other effects just to get through a basic dungeon. And if you can't use magic, you will need potions to pick up the slack. Oh, and in the original, and for the only time in the series, you cannot repair magic items, which is frankly another reason to go with the Unity version. The term noob trap comes to mind, which is the idea that investing in some skills will screw you over in the long run. And that's not wrong. As I said, my first real attempt at Daggerfall failed spectacularly, and it wasn't even the most incompetent build I could think of. Since defending yourself in this game is important, specializing in languages as a primary skill is a mistake, and there are other skills that do not have a broad enough use, even as a minor focus. While other RPGs like Fallout will allow ways to talk your way out of most situations, Daggerfall never really has that as a reliable option, even in the main quest. I've heard the argument that those looking for this kind of system are, in reality, looking for noob traps. But I don't play these games just so I can laugh at a new guy. For one, they're single-player games, so someone else's playthrough doesn't really matter. Secondly, I find that trial and error is an important part of any RPG. You may not choose your favorite class in other games, and you might screw yourself over with a bad choice of skills. Divinity Original Sin was also frustrating at first, but I learned from the first attempt and conquered the second time around. This is just a byproduct of not only skill-focused RPGs, but in RPGs in general. So, go ahead and fail. You'll do better next time. Moving on, what struck me having created two characters in Daggerfall now is how much they differ from each other. Eliwood here is practically the Doom Marine for his strength, speed, and weapon skills. Solaris, a battle mage, is given the highest magic advantage, moves slower, and his attribute contribution is more toward intelligence and agility, among a few other contributions. And then we have the Mages Guild. See, unlike in Morrowind, only in higher ranks can you create magic items or use teleportation. Also, Daggerfall, unlike the later games, regularly had time limits for most of its quests. And it might take days to reach a dungeon, let alone explore it, and then days later to get back with the game's massive land area. With the Mages Guild, you can teleport not just to other guilds, but to any known location you want, including dungeons. That, mixed with the recall spell, and a month-long quest is rendered to maybe a couple of days or less. With the access to magic, gadgets, and Daedric lords, Solaris feels more like a Doctor Strange Secret Society character next to Eliwood's road-weary Aragorn. And I still enjoy playing both characters. Leveling up will grant you a total of 4 to 6 attribute points to distribute, but honestly, I like this better than the bonus attributes of later games. Player characters start and end differently from each other, and working to max out every attribute simply isn't worth the effort. This is the fundamental difference between characters I am looking for in this kind of system, not just to laugh at someone getting destroyed by an imp in Privateer's hold. And I wish more games had this kind of flexibility. And simple flexibility is at this game's core, and one of the things that keeps me coming back. Want to sword fight on a levitating horse? You can, and effortlessly at that. All it takes is you, a horse, and a potion or spell. Magic and magic items are just a button away, climbing gives you another avenue for exploration, and enemies can be approached in numerous ways. How the skills and attributes intertwine with each other is fairly straightforward, giving you enough of a toolbox to think through any situation you encounter without being overly complex. The game starts hard, but once you understand it, it can be very rewarding to get through. I'll even defend the melee combat. The mouse controls take some adjusting, but it gives you enough options balancing between accuracy and power. And there are little strategies beyond that, between tunneling a crowd of enemies, limiting their collective attack power, and knocking them off a platform either to certain doom or at least out of your way. Backstabbing doesn't require high stealth skills, even if it does help. There aren't really any special abilities like in most MMOs or even recent throwback titles, but it doesn't need them either. By keeping it simple, like in Dark Souls, it gives you options that come naturally rather than special moves requiring perk points or a combo system. Also, one more note, this game has level scaling. Many people point at Oblivion for it, but your loot and enemy types in Daggerfall are scaled to your level. And arguably, this was necessary considering the infinite number of random quests it offers, and balancing need to be addressed somehow. Personally, I think it works. The game is an uphill battle from the start, so difficult enemies become the norm. This works twofold. The standard humanoid enemies, warrior, mage, etc., do get higher stats, while stronger monsters you meet at higher levels maintain a fixed strength. So you will eventually overcome them either through clever tricks or building up the right stats. But even the human enemies don't become the obnoxious damage sponges like the ogres or goblins in Oblivion. I just want to point this out because I've seen commentators avoid bringing this up with Daggerfall in particular, often for the sake of knocking the newer titles. Again, the combat remains consistently quick and brutal through the whole game, offset by the fact that you will be buried in Daedric equipment to use and sell. But as I warned in the beginning of this series, each game is a mixed bag. So what's the problem? Okay, first, let's give the glitches a miss. In the original, I was unable to get through the main quest until I switched to Unity and console coded the thing to work. But that is more or less irrelevant in the Unity version, so what problems still remain? First, I would like to say that I do enjoy the dungeons. They are a challenge, non-linear, and force you to think and check the map. They make use of 3D space remarkably well considering the era, especially with its more opened up rooms. That said, the dungeons make zero sense. Now, I know how the module thing works, and that most dungeons are comprised of several smaller dungeons that make up the whole. However, I still have trouble seeing these as real places, or even matching the names of the dungeons. A castle could be made up of caves, caves could end up being mostly castle, and as a result, they do look a bit samey after a while. See, Oblivion, a favorite whipping boy of samey dungeon textures, does one thing right. The caves look like caves, the forts like forts, and the ancient ruins like ancient ruins. Morrowind, as we will see later, probably has the best dungeons for both making sense and being non-linear at the same time. Because every dungeon takes from the same collection of modules, the ones in Daggerfall end up feeling the same after a while, save for the enemy types. A mage's laboratory or a coven looks like any old fortress or cave. They're still compelling despite themselves, but they're still a bit of a letdown if you're hoping to find something unique. The overworld is fairly empty as a result of its massive size, necessitating fast travel to just move along to the next thing in any reasonable game time. Even with the increased draw distance that the Unity version offers, there's still very little to find in between towns and dungeons. Morrowind through Skyrim had landmarks and little secrets to find. Even something as basic as a distinct valley or larger mountain to work around would have made the exploration more enjoyable. The alchemy system here is, frankly, the least compelling in the entire series. Instead of being able to combine effects like you could in Morrowind onward, you either had a laundry list of ingredients or nothing. Having ingredients in your cart might save you some money at some point, but potions are not expensive enough to justify micromanaging through its god-awful user interface. Finding the ingredients themselves is utterly random as well. You don't have plants to pick them off of, nor do they really show up anywhere sensible. I seldom find any lich dust on, a lich, leaving any enemy as a potential grab bag of random ingredients. The reputation system is straightforward most of the time, but two scenarios completely break it down, and I'm not convinced these are the only two. When serving a knightly order, you can receive a quest to retrieve a powerful artifact. What task does that involve? Bravely kidnapping a child from a palace and bringing it to a witch. No, the child does not want to go, before anyone asks. What happens to your reputation when you do this successfully? It improves, when by rights the protagonist should be drawn and quartered. I understand doing dubious things for powerful items, but that the game and factions treat this like it's a good thing is just ghastly. The Daedric princes tend to be less questionable in their tasks than those upholding chivalry. The second scenario that breaks this down is when you have to break into the castle dungeons of the three main kingdoms for the main quests: Daggerfall, Sentinel, and Wayrest. Even if you are the loudest thief in the world, killing every guard in the main hall, you can still get quests from the nobility of these castles afterwards. The kings even refer to you as a friend, even though you've murdered half their court right in front of them. There are zero repercussions for this, even if you are a Knight of Daggerfall. And again, Eliwood was not a stealthy character, nor did anyone seem broken apart by the chosen ending of the main quest, which doesn't go their way.
Great Numidium, its raw power tempered only by the blades, crushes all of the rebellious children of the Empire, destroying their armies.
To those going on and on about how your reputation mattered in the previous games, think about those examples for a second. The series has never been good about reputation or consequence. And even something like utterly failing the main quest is just a reload moment, not something as interesting as a proper alternate ending. Speaking of the main quest, this is probably my least favorite main quest in the series. Arena in Skyrim had very straightforward plots with cool set pieces. Morrowind's storyline managed to be fun and have complex world building at the same time. Oblivion, okay, that one kind of dragged, but it still at least had a cool ending. Daggerfall starts with the greatest FMV intro of all time.
Now, my champion, rest well this night, for tomorrow you sail for the kingdom of Daggerfall.
Setting you on a murder mystery across the three major kingdoms of Iliac Bay, eventually introducing a world-changing MacGuffin for the last two dungeons. And there are some memorable moments, like the Mad Witch Nilfgaard, the King of Worms, the Orc leader looking for legitimacy in the Empire, and Prince Loten, a prince who merely wants to know what happened to his brother. And I do appreciate the utter contempt the game seems to have toward royalty, especially during a year of absolute political chaos. But the quest as a whole feels undernourished. The murder mystery technically pays off, even if the murderer is the dullest villain in the entire series. But then the totem, a great world-changing device, is introduced for like the last eighth of the story. Once you have it, you pick which faction gets a totem, which will affect the ending. In the final dungeon, you activate the totem via a gem, and that's it. Elements like the Numidium and Underking are mentioned, but you see neither of them. There's nothing really resembling a final boss either. And maybe that would be missing the point, but with so many factions wanting this device, the totem part of the quest feels a bit rushed in the end. All of that being said, the game's mechanics are still very solid. As far as character creation and how the skills play off of each other, this is probably my favorite overall system in the series. Little things like climbing add to exploration, the system allows for horseback combat without much effort, and the combat itself is quick, simple, and often brutal. In fact, I would love to see this same set applied to a smaller, more concentrated world like Morrowind, with just as much thought into overworld encounters as the dungeons. Of course, the revived modding community could bring those wishes to fruition, but I'm already doing videos on Daggerfall mod, so I might leave it at that for now. Next time, we proceed to what many fans consider the best installment in the series, The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind.